Hello, 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 everyone. So welcome to another masterclass hosted by Seven Ways to Wealth. I'm super duper duper excited that you guys are here and that you were able to make it in the last minute. So today we have a phenomenal masterclass scheduled for you guys. So today we're going to be talking about all things dealing with business funding. So I have the pleasure of introducing our guest speaker. His name is Brian Dorsey, and he is the CEO of the Funding Playbook. So he has been doing this, assisting entrepreneurs with acquiring business funding for over a decade, and he has helped thousands of entrepreneurs acquire millions of dollars in funding. Okay, so that is you actually leveraging business credit and tapping into OPM. So you want to be tapping into other people's money, specifically the bank's money. And so Mr. Dorsey knows how to do that. He has the blueprint and he's going to share that blueprint with you guys today. So like I said, I'm super excited to dive into this because I know that a lot of you guys are business owners and entrepreneurs. So let's get started with the masterclass. After Mr. Dorsey is done, then we'll have some time for Q&A as long as time permits, okay? So, Mr. Dorsey, you
Awesome. Can you hear me?
thank you. Yep, you have the floor. Thank you so much. Thank you for
Good.
coming on and agreeing to do this masterclass and just pouring into the community. I appreciate you so much.
Of course. Good afternoon, beautiful people. It's always such an opportunity to be here for Seven Ways and, being a part of the community myself. Christina does an amazing job and she's going to connect you with a lot of great people, right? And I'm just blessed to have an opportunity to be one of those people and just come back and give game and give value. So I am a visual person. So I do have a quick presentation that we will go over and we will review together. And yes, we are going to teach you all about business funding, right? Leveraging business funding in order to create assets or to purchase assets and create cash flow, right? So this is a crash course on business funding masterclass. Right now, as a disclaimer, this is very general information, right? So the funding process, I want to be very specific. The funding, the industry is an ever-changing industry, and there is no funding process or no funding results that are going to be the exact same. So this is very general, good information, but your specific circumstances are going to be unique, right? So that's very important. So as a disclaimer, I just always want to cover that on the front end is that this is solely intended for educational and informational purposes, right? This is not your specific content, financial, legal, or or specific advice. You would need to consult for your specific scenarios on how to actually apply this process. But this is going to give you a great overview on what this actually is, right? So before I even take the next 30, 45 minutes to really talk about all about business funding, let's talk about some benefits of business funding, right? And why you want to use business funding. For one, you want to leverage other people's money in order to in order to purchase assets and create cash flow. Ideally, you really don't want to be risking your money, right? And so you want to be able to leverage. Leverage is a key word. But the other thing is business funding. So we're going to talk all about business funding because you want to be able to access business funding in order to actually expand your operations. So the first benefit of business funding that we talk about is that each business EIN is treated separately. So you as a personal, you have a personal social security number. The business, as I'm sure you're aware, and you've talked all about EINs through the master classes and through trust as well too. So the EIN is a 9-digit number that identifies the business separately as well too. So you as a person, you only have one social security number. You have one credit profile. Each business that is established gets its own separate EIN and can establish its own credit profile. So it creates a lot of opportunity for leverage. The other thing is that, remember, we're talking about business funding. When you're a business owner, you have higher expenses and you are starting a business for profit to generate revenue. So because of that, when you're getting funding, you're going to get much higher business funding than you do personal funding as well too. So you want to operate business funding because you do get much higher limits. The other thing is that what I see a lot of people do is they might have a good credit score, they might have some personal credit cards, they might have access to some personal funding. But the thing about it is that whenever you're growing a business, you want to separate or divorce yourself financially from the business. And so you really want to grow that business without it affecting your personal credit. And so a huge part of this is when I see people using personal funds, personal credit cards to grow their business, it's great that you're using leverage, but there's a much better way to use business credit because the debts don't actually report to the personal credit, right? Another major benefit of business funding is obviously to start, grow, or scale current operations or investments as well too, which is everything that we're going to talk about. Now, another common question I get all the time, okay, business funding, that's awesome, but like, how can I actually use it? And so these are some of the most common ways that a lot of our clients use it, right? So let's talk about a little bit about investing. So mentorships, masterminds, and networking. This community is a prime example of that. You had to invest to be a part of this community to have access to this information, right? And so you can do this for multiple mentorships, multiple masterminds, and multiple networking to establish your relationships, right? So that's a huge opportunity to leverage funding.
Didn't print.
The other thing is marketing budgets, right? You have a
There
company.
should have been a few things on the print already. None of my stuff printed.
Oh, give me 1 second. I was trying to mute.
Old paper.
Yes, there was paper under paper, like underneath.
Oh, got you. So I need to reprint everything. Okay, that's the one I had just reprinted.
We got mute up. We got mute up.
There we go. I found it. My apologies. So the other thing that's really a very common thing to use for business funding is marketing purposes, right? So when you have a brand, whenever you have a business, you need exposure so that people can be aware of your products or services. And so a lot of our clients will use business funding for marketing budgets, whether that be ads, whether that be content, paying influencers, media pages, things like that for marketing exposure and branding. Asset purchases, right? This is huge. This is one of my favorite ways to use business funding is asset purchases. So using business funding to acquire other businesses. You can use it. I've seen clients invest in the stocks, invest in the real estate, right? Things of that nature. And then obviously business capital, right? Operational expenses, equipment like computers, cameras, desks, things of that nature, technology, and obviously hiring staff and things of that nature as well too. So there's a lot of great ways that you can leverage business funding in order to grow your business. And the biggest question, I've kind of touched base on this a little bit, but the biggest question that I always ask people is, how would you like to purchase assets and create cash flow without risking your own money? And it's absolutely possible. It's absolutely possible. We've done it over and over again. I've been teaching about this for a long time, and it's absolutely possible, but you do have to understand a couple key components. And that's what I'm going to share with you over about the next 30 minutes. Everything really comes down to setting the foundation, right? The foundation of a home, the foundation of every business. The foundation is really the strongest part. And so that's what we're going to cover all about today is the foundation and the overview at a high level of how this actually works. And so over the next couple minutes, I'm going to show you a couple things. I'm going to show you how to maximize your funding probability when you know what a good credit report and what yours looks like. So we're going to talk about business funding, we're going to talk about business credit, and we're going to talk about personal credit as well too. So you want to know how all of this information comes together in order for you to create the leverage that you're looking for, right? You're going to also minimize denials and increase the amount you get funded when you know how to actually structure your business properly. We're going to touch base a lot on this later, but you want to have your business structured like a business so that it's actually not treated or presented as a hobby. Very, very important. And I'm going to show you how to fund your business in the most efficient way possible, oftentimes at 0% interest and minimal documentation in order to get the funding that you're looking for. Now, ultimately, this is perfect for a couple people, right? We're going to talk about how to get funding on demand, being able to access capital whenever you need it, and also whenever opportunities arise. You want to increase your buying power. Again, everything we're going to talk about is leverage. When you have more buying power, you have more resources, you're able to capitalize on more opportunities. We're going to talk about getting high limit approvals. When I talk about funding, we're not talking about, 20, you can, But whenever I talk about funding deals, we're talking about $50,000 to $100,000 plus. Oftentimes we do multiple hundreds of $1,000s in funding or more for each client. So I'm going to talk to you about getting high limit approvals so that you can really scale your operations. Just like we talked about this earlier, creating more leverage, having more opportunity, and really learning the correct steps to get funded. And I say correct steps because funding has become really popular to talk about the last couple of years. But unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation given out there as well, too. And so I want to make sure that you get the correct steps in order to get funded so that you can actually apply this information. Now, before I even take any portion of your time, what even qualifies me to be here, right? I'm an expert in credit and funding. This is not something that I started yesterday. I've actually been involved in credit, learning about credit, building credit since like 2013, 2014, and full-time in the actual funding section of credit since 2017, right? So a lot of experience. I've seen a lot of situations. I have extensive experience in creating tailored funding solutions for entrepreneurs and businesses. Remember, there is no one-size-fits-all funding strategy for everyone. Everything has to be custom tailored fit to your business and your unique needs, right? I've also built a multiple seven-figure consultancy doing the same thing that I'm sitting here talking to you about every day. And ultimately what we do is we streamline the process for funding, asset acquisition, and really laying the foundation for long-term success, establishing business credit. And what I do on a daily basis is I'm very skilled in structuring deals and building strong partnerships between banks, lenders, and investors in order to grow businesses. Now, if you want to see some of my content, you want to follow some of my, educational things of that nature, you can follow me. You can see it down there. It is CEO Dorsey on all platforms if you want to stay connected, right? So the other thing is that here's the biggest thing is that when you get into funding, there's some old ways and there's some misconceptions about what this actual process looks like. So we're going to talk about the old way, and then we're going to talk about the new way. The old way is really taking years of research using trial and error only to come up with incomplete information, right? You need direct access to someone or organizations or programs who actually implement this on a daily basis, right? The other old way is really trying to earn and save income so that you can reach your dreams or support your family, right? In most situations, generally, there's a lot of people who are like, hey, if I had 10,000 here, I could invest into this, or 5,000 here, or 20,000 here, or whatever X amount opportunity that is, and they start trying to save in order to access on that opportunity. The biggest thing is time. So the one thing is that even if they can save, it's going to take time. And when you have access to capital and opportunities, oftentimes time is of the essence. And for most general situations, they can fund themselves $50,000 to $100,000 a lot faster than they could save $50,000 to $100,000 and be able to capitalize on those opportunities. The other way is constantly being denied whenever you're looking for access to capital, or worst case, being approved, but getting extremely high interest rates. You want to get the prime capital, you want to be able to fund yourself on demand, and you want to be able to get the ideal interest rates and the best relationships. And then it's also using continually hard-earned revenue to invest back into your business. When you walk outside or you look at buildings, or you're looking at the world, or you're looking at major corporations or major businesses, they are leveraging business credit and business funding in order to grow their company and their operations, right? And so the new way is really empowering yourself with financial education so that you can take back control of you and access funding when you need it. It's an expert level understanding of the banking system and how to actually acquire high limit funding. And just like we talk about all day, leveraging other people's money in order to build wealth. I'm going to say it over and over again. We use funding to purchase assets and create cash flow. And it's really, when you establish credit with the banks, you have a much higher status with the banks to use them as tools and resources for the growth of your business, right? A couple things for who this is really for. The startup entrepreneur who is really overwhelmed with how they're going to fund or grow their business. It's a very common business owner or a very big problem that funding actually solves so that they actually can invest into their operations. Business owners who are generating some revenue, but tired of using their hard-earned money, right? So they may be growing a business, they have a growing business, there's more opportunities, but there just may not be quite enough cash flow in order to access those opportunities, right? So funding allows them some leeway so that they can actually create that leverage and take advantage of those opportunities, right? A lot of times we work with successful business owners who might be generating 6 or 7 figures already, and they just want to increase their buying power. Again, having more leverage. And ultimately, this is for people who love purchasing assets and creating cash flow without risking their own money. Now, while we talk about who this is for, it's very important that we talk about who this is not for as well, too. This is not for people who are thinking about possibly starting a business or just like the idea of funding, right? You must already have an objective, a goal in mind, or a business started for you to go and access capital. And it's going to be the best practice to use that as well, too, so that when you get access to the capital, you're using it the right way. Very, very important. This is not for people who make excuses and complain, right? You want to get access to information. You want to get access to capital. So again, you can take advantage of the opportunities that you have. Everything that we talk about is applicable information. So this is definitely not for people who just want to, learn information without being prepared to take action and get results. We give back and we teach a lot of this because I'm very passionate about what I do, because this is important. And I want you to be able to use this information and apply this information to your situation. And again, this is really not for people who are really serious about receiving an extra 6+ figures in funding. Now that we discussed that, now we can actually get into the foundation of the key components to how you actually make this happen. Now, everything that we're going to talk about is business funding. Now, before we go this, we have to set the foundation because there's a couple things that are important. We're going to talk about business funding and we're going to talk about business credit. Now, this is general information, but generally, most people, even though you may have a business established and even though you may have some business credit already being built, for most people, their business credit is not strong enough to go and get funding solely on their business credit. So what's going to happen is you can still access business funding and establish business credit that does not report or affect your personal credit, but you and oftentimes would combine both personal credit and business credit in order to access business funding. So I hope that makes sense. And if not, we'll touch base on it a lot more at the end. Now, because of that, you need to know how to maximize your personal credit report as well, too, as the foundation to getting business funding. Because when you know how to properly structure your report, it's going to put you in a much better position to go and get the capital that you're looking for. Now, a couple key components here is that whenever I talk about personal credit, there's multiple credit reporting agencies out there, but the main 3 that we're going to talk about is TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. Now, the first thing I want to make very clear is that these are privately owned independent companies. So it's very important that you know that, because all of your information needs to line up exactly across all credit reporting agencies. And it's your responsibility in order to make sure that that information is 100% accurate and reporting correctly on your behalf. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that this is identifying information. So you really want to have one name and one address for instant approvals whenever you're looking at that credit report. And that does include employers as well, too, because when you have one address or you have a few addresses or few employers, it makes you look a lot more stable when it comes time to get access to capital. So very, very important. And the reason we go over this is because the number one reason that people get denied, in my experience, is due to non-matching information. It's not that they didn't necessarily have good credit, it's that the information doesn't align across all of the credit reporting agencies, which is very important, and that's why we talk about the credit reports first. Now, whenever you're looking at funding, I know this may shock a lot of people, but whenever you're looking at funding, the credit score is really almost irrelevant. Whenever people are getting ready for funding, the credit score kind of gives you a good idea of where someone is, but that's not really how underwriting looks at it. And so the way that they look at it is not necessarily based on the score, It's based on the profile that actually makes up that account. And so there's a couple key data points that we're going to talk about whenever you're looking at that personal credit report in order to go and access business funding. So if you look over here, there's a couple factors that we're going to go over. On the first column, we're going to look at the factors. So the factors that we're going to talk about are utilization. We're going to talk about inquiries. We're going to talk about payment history. We're going to talk about credit age. We're going to talk about derogatory remarks, and we're going to talk about total accounts. If you also notice, they're also going over, they have TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax in the other columns as well too, because again, the information has to line up between each credit reporting agency. Now, the first thing we're going to break down is utilization. Utilization very simply means the amount of credit that you're using as compared to the amount of credit that you have available, right? So in just simple math, let's say you have a $1,000 credit card, and let's say you're using $200 of that $1,000 credit card. What that means is that if you're using $200 of that $1,000 credit limit, that would be 20% of that credit utilization. So that means your utilization for that account is 20% utilization, right? Very, very simple. So a key point with utilization, a key data point is that you want to stay below 30% utilization of your accounts. I see a lot of times people say, hey, I have a $5,000 credit card, $10,000 credit card. I thought I could use the whole thing. You have the limit available, yes, but remember, it's about data and it's about setting that foundation, because institutions and banks love to give you money. They're in the business of lending money, but they want to lend money, or they're more ideal or prone to lend money to accounts or people or businesses that don't look like they need a lot of money, right? So it's important that you maintain these utilization, because it's still you need to use some of their balances. And the reason that we say 1% to 29% is important, because remember, institutions want to lend out money so that they can make money on it. If they can't eventually build that relationship with you, then they don't really want to, or see you utilizing funds, they don't see the use to lend out more funding or more capital. So a key point here is that you want to be between 1 and 29% utilization, and that's for each individual account. So that's the utilization for your overall credit report needs to be below 30%, but also each individual account as well too. So that's important. Inquiries do not affect your credit report as much as far as the score. They only knock your credit score a couple of times per inquiry. But what they do show is how quote unquote credit desperate or how quote unquote credit thirsty you are. And so really within the last year, to be in optimal position, you really want to have less than 2 or 3 inquiries within the last 6 to 12 months. And that's also between each individual credit reporting agency as well too. Now, payment history, this is huge. You need to have 100% payment history. When you are looking for access to more funding and access to more money, you need to have a history of showing that you have paid everything on time, right? So that's very, very important, especially when you're looking for high limits of capital. Now, credit age. You really want to see an average of 4+ years. A lot of times, again, they want to see experience and your ability to manage financing and previous credit products. So you really want to see an average age of 4 years. Now, derogatory remarks, no derogatory remarks. So when we talk about derogatory remarks, we mean collections, charge-off, bankruptcies, things of that nature, right? You want to show a history of being able to manage the financing and credit that you have been given. And so to put yourself in the best position, you don't want to have any derogatory remarks on your report whenever you're going for funding, right? And then total accounts, right? You ideally want to have 10+ accounts, and you want to have multiple different accounts. So that way, again, it can show your ability to manage multiple different financial products over a period of time. Now, it's important to note, and it's noted at the bottom, these are the ideal metrics for maximum approvals, but they are not the absolute determinant for an approval. Again, we focus less on the score and more about the profile. And so we want to show you how to put yourself in an optimal position, so that way you don't have any issues whenever you're looking for funding, right? We'll go over some minimal qualifications later. Now, The other foundation for you to, in order for you to see your credit reports and for you to see your credit scores, is that you're going to actually need a credit monitoring account. So there's a couple different benefits of having a credit monitor account. There's hundreds out there. They have paid versions. They have annual. They also have annualcreditreport.com. You can also get your credit reports for free on there. It's important to note that on annualcreditreport.com, you won't get a score, but you will get the structure of your profile. So a couple different things here. The reason you want a credit monitoring account is because in order for you to find the issues, you need to know how to actually access your credit report. And so you can easily find and eliminate the issues when you know how to access your credit report and when you also know how to read it, right? And again, there's a ton out there. There's really not one that is really better than the other, especially when you're looking at the profile and not necessarily the score, but there's a couple different benefits, right? So you're going to get a full picture of all of your credit from the three major credit reporting agencies. Again, that's TransUnion, that's Equifax, and that's Experian. You also want to be able to get a regular update on your credit scores. Things and data change every day. You need to be up to date with the most up-to-date information that is being reported on your behalf. Very, very important. You also want to be able to compare your reports to spot and identify any discrepancies. And the reason we talk about this in the beginning is because it's the foundation. You want to access and view this information before you do the funding, because by the time you access capital, or by the time you're applying for capital, you want to know that you're in the best position possible to get the funding that you're looking for. And this is how you actually do that, right? And it's important, we're going to talk about this later, it's going to help you manage the timing of the credit and funding applications that you are actually submitting, which is very, very important, right? Now, the first thing is you're going to access your credit reports. The second thing is when you're looking for capital, it's all about relationships, right? And so we're going to break this down a little better. So when you're looking at your credit reports, TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian, remember I talked about earlier, they are private independent companies. And it's important that you see the information there that they're reporting, because they may not always report the same thing. And so to be effective, or to be the most effective, you want to choose banks that align with your best credit reporting agencies. So for example, in this scenario, it is possible to have a great TransUnion credit profile, a great Equifax credit profile, but you may not have a great Experian profile, right? And you'll find this happens a lot more common than people really realize. And so when you're looking at those kind of scenarios, if you have a strong TransUnion and a strong Equifax, but a bad Experian, you want to choose banks that align with your strongest credit reporting agencies. So in this scenario, you would want to choose banks that pulled from TransUnion and Equifax, and banks that really stayed away from Experian if you have negative information reporting there, right? So it's very, very important that you're going to choose the banks that align with your best credit reporting agencies, so it puts you in the best position possible to get the funding that you're looking for. Now, the other thing is you want to prioritize banks where you already have strong relationships with. So choosing banks that align with the credit reporting agency is important, but again, relationships matter. And so when we talk about having relationships with banks, it's banks that you may already have products with. Those are banks that you may have a credit card with, an auto loan, a checking account, a savings account, some kind of investment account, right? Wherever you have products or accounts at, you also want to prioritize those banks, because in addition to credit, you also have personal banking relationships and products with them as well too, right? So those are very, very important. And then when you're looking for high limits of capital, right? Again, when I talk about high limits of capital, I'm talking about $100,000 to $200,000 plus in access to capital. Now, the reason I say that is because it's absolutely possible to get 100,000 to 200,000 when you put the data and you have the structure for the things that we talked about on this. Now, it's absolutely possible to do it, but you're typically not going to get the 100,000 to 200,000 from one bank. And so for best practice is you typically want to choose, I tell people choose between their top 5 to 10 banks that they want to work with in order to go and get the best funding results. It can be a lot less, but again, I'd rather have you prepared to use more and being able to strategize this, because it's more about strategy in order than just kind of hoping that you do come up with it. Now, I do give you a couple different examples over here. So if you have now remember, there's hundreds of banks really in the United States. There's thousands of banks alone, right? So a couple examples is if you have a great, if you have a great TransUnion, you can look at banks like Navy Federal. You can look at banks like US Bank. If you have a Cadence Bank, that's a great bank as well too, a little bit smaller, but they're amazing. If you have a great Experian, you can look at banks like American Express, First Horizon. First Horizon is another smaller bank, but they're amazing. And then PNC is a great bank. And if you have a great Equifax, you can look at you can look at banks like Truist, you can look at banks like Chase, and you can look at banks like PenFed. Now, remember, those are just 9 banks right there. There are thousands of banks in the United States alone. Now, once you have the credit report, once you know that your credit report is in the optimal position, once you actually have all of your banks chosen, whether it be based on relationships or credit, now what you want to do is you want to implement the banking relationship manager. So when you apply for funding, you do not want to be submitting random online applications for funding. A couple different reasons is that when you're online, there are it's more automated and it's more of a computer. And the biggest thing about online is that online, banks are always fighting fraud. They always want to make sure that you are a verification. So the reason that you want to use a banking relationship manager and you want to have accounts is because you're verified on the front end. And when you apply with that banking relationship manager, it's kind of like a cosign, and they're going to process the application on your behalf after you're already verified. So it's a lot more secure for the bank to do that. And remember, relationships matter. If you submit an application online, you're just in a computer system, you're just another random number in an application submitting an application. If you use a banking relationship manager, however, that banker has a relationship with the bank. That banker also has a relationship with underwriting. And so again, you're typically going to get much better results whenever you work with a banking relationship manager for those reasons. So very simply, banking relationship managers are trusted bankers at the banks that you're applying with who will typically dramatically increase your chances of even just getting an approval and typically help you get much higher credit limits as well too. Now, when we talk about first round sequences, right? So remember, I talk about high limits of capital. If you do everything that we talked about, if you do everything that we talked about up until this point, so you get your, you get your credit report aligned, you do all the things that we talked about this, you structure your bank, you run a full sequence. So a sequence is using multiple banks. Whenever we talk about a sequence, that we're using multiple banks instead of just that, one bank approach. So in your first round expectations, if you run a full sequence, it's very common for clients to see between $100,000 to $250,000 plus in the initial funding. Now, it's important. This is just your first round. This is very important because you can do multiple rounds of business funding. But the key thing is that you want to get access to the first capital first and use it the right way. So this is why I say you have to have a business or a goal or some kind of opportunities in mind in order to scale those operations, because you're going to use that capital to fund your key ventures. So you're going to invest in your business, your real estate, your stocks, your marketing, whatever the case may be, in order to increase your value and ultimately generate the ROI, which is a return on the investments that you've actually invested, right? Now, what's going to happen is as you're using that capital and you're going to manage it well, you're going to repeat the same process that we just talked about. You're going to do it typically within about 6 to 12 months because you're going to let those accounts age. Now, when this happens, let's just use a hypothetical example today. Right now, today, most people don't have $100,000 in business credit or $100,000 in business funding. The difference from a client who gets funded today as compared to 6 to 12 months from now is that now they've actually generated a credit score. They've generated accounts. They've had access to the products, and they've been able to generate, and they've been able to build those relationships. So the difference between 6 to 12 months from now is that they've had 100,000, they've been able to use it, they've been able to manage it well, they've been able to get used to it and actually establish their business credit. So when they do this process again, they can expect similar funding results because of something that we call comparable credit. Whenever banks are giving out money, they typically don't want to be the first bank to give you large amounts of capital. But remember, banks are independent businesses. They compete for each other's business. So for example, if you have Bank A who gave you, let's just say 25,000 initially, and you're applying 6 to 12 months later at Bank B knows, because they can see the credit profile. This is why we talk about the data and the profiles, because when Bank B looks at it and you have 25,000 from Bank A and you're applying and you have a great personal and you have a great business, Bank B knows that they can't really compete for your business if they give you 5,000. It's just you're not really going to use it because it doesn't make sense, right? So they use comparable credit to compete for your business so that you use more of those products. That is why you can expect similar funding results on future and subsequent rounds. Now, the long-term goal for this is that you're going to get access to the capital, consistently manage it well, and you're going to manage that funding to build access to multiple six-figure credit limits that you're using to advance your business, your operations, things of that nature. Now, some of our clients, when you duplicate this process and you realize that there's hundreds and thousands of banks in the US alone, you realize how much opportunity is really out there, especially when you go back to what we talked about initially. Each business gets its own EIN and builds its own business credit profile. So some of our clients have gone on to do $1 million plus in access to business capital by duplicating these same exact strategies that I'm teaching you here over time. Now, when you're setting expectations is very important for me, right? And so remember, whenever we talk about that initial sequence, we're going to use, let's say, 5 to 10 banks. So in this particular scenario, we're going to show you an example of what it looks like on 8 banks. Now, remember, I kind of talked about this earlier. When you have the 10 banks, you can add, or those 5 to 10 banks, you can add or reduce that number of banks based on your results, but it's better to have multiple opportunities when you're initially planning, right? So this is an example of an 8-bank sequence, and this is a real life scenario that happened for one of our clients, right? And so this is an example that we like to use whenever you're going through to get the 100,000, but showing you what it actually looks like from not getting it from one bank. So client went to Bank 1, they got a $12,000 approval. Nice. Bank 2, they gave a denial. Bank 3, they gave them 50,000. Bank 4 gave them 20. Bank 5 was a denial. Bank 6 was a $15,000 approval. Bank 7 was a denial, and Bank 8 was a $3,000 approval. Now, this is a realistic scenario because they still got the 100,000, but they didn't do it from one bank. And you can see that over those multiple banks, you're still able to get that 100,000, and you're able to build multiple accounts on that business credit profile. So it's important to note that these are the best strategies to utilize when you're actually utilizing these processes in order to get business funding. Now we're going to get into what it actually looks like for the proper business structure, because you want your business to actually be structured like a business so that it's treated like a business. And there's a lot of key data points here that are going to matter a lot. And because the reason why most businesses get denied, and when you understand why most businesses get denied, you understand what not to do so that you can get the opposite result, right? And you can get the ideal result. So a lot of what we talk about is fundability, which we're going to break down this in really a little bit more detail in just a second. But fundability is just really lender compatibility. How strong does that profile, and how comparable, or how much of a low risk is that business to get funded whenever it's actually looking for capital? That's the first thing. The second thing is that you ideally need to divorce yourself from your business, right? Your business is a separate entity. It's a separate EIN. So you want different addresses, different phone numbers, instead of having your personal address, personal phone number, personal email, operating business. And like I said, we're going to break this down a little bit more in just a moment. You also want to structure the foundation of building business credit. So a lot of times, again, the reason people get denied funding is not necessarily because they don't qualify, but it's because of non-matching information. And so they need to make sure that everything is structured properly so that everything is reporting correctly when it's time to go and get funding. Very, very important. A lot of people don't know how to leverage their assets or their income in order to maximize funding opportunities. So they miss out on a lot of capital just due to lack of access to that. And a lot of times people fail to set up with any of the business credit reporting agencies. So there's a number of them. There's Business Equifax, there's Business Experian. You can establish the Paydex score through Dun & Bradstreet, right? There is the Small Business Financial Exchange, right? There's multiple business credit reporting agencies. And again, you want your information out there and validated, so it's a lot easier to verify your business. And another thing is that no open credit accounts with major revolving credit card companies, right? No Visa, American Express, Capital One, Discover, things of that nature, in order to actually build out the credit profiles, because the goal whenever you're doing this is not just knowing how to build credit, but it's being able to get the approvals that you're looking for, and ideally instant approvals, because when you do a lot of this on the front end, there's a lot less verification and documentation involved on the back end. And this is why we talk about this so much. Now, here's really how the process works. And this is where we're going to break down exactly how the business looks like and how to structure it so that it's treated like a professional business. So we're going to solve 3 major problems that most business owners face when it comes to establishing business credit. So it's properly setting up the business to run like a business instead of a hobby. It's also creating a proven proven system to get your business funded with minimal documentation. Again, when your business is structured properly and it's more credible on the front end, when you present your business as a professional business, it's going to be treated as a professional business. However, if you bring a business in and it looks like a hobby, then the bank is going to treat your business like it's a hobby, right? And they're going to ask for a lot more paperwork, a lot more documentation, and a lot more explanation as to what you do. And it's ideally you want to create your business to be credible so that you can be treated as a professional and a lot less documentation involved, right? And it's really leveraging the banks as your investors. There is no reason that once you actually have access to capital that you should only be giving up or need so many investors. I hear people all the time, hey, I need an investor for 10,000 or 5,000 or 20,000 or 50,000 or 100,000. And they really didn't need an investor. They have all the ideas. They just need to know how to access business credit and business funding so that they can leverage banks as their investors, right? Huge. Now, when it comes to building the professional foundation, right? I know there's a huge disclaimer I want to make here. It is absolute. I know this is 7 ways. I know Christina gives you a lot of value, a lot of information, and teaches you all about the benefits of trust, right? And again, most people, this is general information, but most people's trust does not have enough credit in order to get the financing on their own. And so also it's important to know too, is that trusts are different entities. There are different paperwork, right? The contract is valued differently. And so the reason that I say this is because when it comes to banking, there's a different process for funding trust as compared to funding state entities. When I say state entities, I mean LLCs, corporations, things of that nature, right? So it's very important that I say this because the way that I teach business funding and best practice that I've seen for myself and our clients is to establish state entities. So that way you can acquire funding. And if you have the trust control these entities, then the state entities would go out and get access to capital in the best interest of the trust, right? I say that because what I'm teaching you here is how to establish LLCs and corporations so that you can leverage those in order to access business funding, right? Very, very important. So I don't want to make any assumptions where anyone is. I want to make sure that you get this foundation and know how to structure this business as a professional business from the foundation, right? And so the first thing, step 1, if you look over here, obviously to start a business, you have to have some kind of business name. Now, when you come up with that business name, it's very important that you go and get the domain. Now, the domain, you can typically get it at GoDaddy. There's also Google domains, right? There's a couple sites out there, but you want to go to these sites and you want to get the website address. A domain is a website address, and you want to get a domain or a website address that matches your company. So that way it is congruent. Now, when you do that, you're going to also at that domain, you're going to get a business email address, and you want it at your business domain. So for example, I use this example all the time. Let's say you have a company, ABC Consulting. You want your website to be at abcconsulting.com, because that way, let's say your name was Bob, it could be Bob at abcconsulting.com. It looks professional, it aligns, and it's congruent, right? Now, when you do that, you're also going to get a business address. You want to get a business address. It is possible to do, in full disclaimer, right? It is possible to fund home-based businesses. Since COVID, it's been a lot more lenient, but you're still going to get more capital if your address is separate from your home address. So you want to obtain a business address that is separate from your home address for credibility and legitimacy purposes. The next thing is you also want to get a business phone number. When you're doing funding applications, you want to have a business phone number and you want to have a personal phone number. It looks like you're professional, you've separated everything, and it looks clean. Now, the next thing is when you have all of those in order, you're going to apply at the Secretary of State. So each state has a Secretary of State. That is the website and the programs where these entities are actually established, and their information is actually held. You can do this yourself. It is absolutely possible to do it yourself, or you can hire a third party to do it, right? The next thing you want to do, you want to get a registered agent, and you want to have an operating agreement or bylaws whenever you're setting up these entities. That way, again, you have all of your paperwork in order. Now, from there, and I know Christina showed you this, you go to irs.gov and you go and get an EIN. Very, very important. As you all should be aware, EINs are free. They take like 5 minutes to set up. Very, very simple process. I say that, and I always emphasize this because I can't tell you how many times over the years I've seen people pay a couple $100s or large amounts of money to go get an EIN. You do not need to do that. EINs are free on irs.gov. They take just a couple minutes to set up. You get it, and you can immediately access them. Now, the other thing that's important, so ideally, you do want to get set up with DNB, which is Dun & Bradstreet. That's a business credit reporting agency, and you're absolutely going to need the Dun & Bradstreet if you want to get involved in government contracts, right? The other thing is once you get your business established, you need to have some kind of online presence so that way your business looks professional. At the bare minimum, build some kind of website. Whenever I talk about building websites, it doesn't have to be $1,000 websites and these very expensive websites. It can be a simple one-page website, right? There's all kind of online platforms. You can establish a one-page website, even just put up, worst case, a picture of you and the services that you offer. That's at least going to be a lot more professional than no website at all, right? So ideally, you want to get a website. You can also use YouTube's, Facebook, Instagrams as way in order to promote your business and establish some online presence. Now, another key important part, you have to open a business bank account. I cannot tell you over the years how many people have been running a business and they run it out of their personal account and they have no business bank accounts, right? You absolutely need to open up a business bank account. And ideally, you want to open up business bank accounts at the places that you want to get funding from. This is why you set that foundation, because again, it's all about building that relationship. Now, the reason I put personal bank account below that is because ideally, remember, just like I said, you want to go open up business bank accounts at the banks that you want to apply for funding for. But remember, the more products that you have with a bank, which is the more things that they offer. Again, credit cards, personal accounts, checking accounts, savings accounts, things of that nature are products of a bank. The more products that you have with a bank, the more trustworthy you are with that bank. And so because even though you're going for business funding, it's a necessity to open up that business bank account for best practice, but it would be optional for you to open up the personal account as well too, just to strengthen the relationship for that particular bank. It's optional, but again, I always suggest it because I'm always talking about building relationships. The other thing is that once you open the accounts, you need to make a deposit. Now, for most banks, they don't really have a minimal deposit per se. Some banks do. Now, ideally, what I'm going to tell you, I at least put $100 in these accounts. Open up a business checking, at least put $100 in that business checking. Obviously, though, the more money that you put in with a bank, the stronger that the relationship is going to be, which in turn ultimately means more funding for you on the back end, right? And I talked about it down here, use different products with the banks. So banks offer merchant accounts, they offer bank accounts, they offer credit products. These are all products of a bank you can use in order to build that relationship, right? And this is going to help you build a solid professional foundation when it comes time to get access to capital, right? Now, there's a couple different ways to establish a business. Startup, we're going to talk about three. We're going to talk about startups, we're going to talk about age corporations, and we're going to talk about acquisitions, right? They all have their own unique benefits and their own unique use cases. Now, with a startup, you obviously are starting it up, so you have the most flexibility and creativity in establishing that business from the ground up, right? You can also create unique offerings, establish new markets, and really have the freedom to really create it however you want to, because again, it's a startup. Now, it's important. Startups can still secure capital within 30 days of being started, right? But it's absolutely possible. We do it all the time. We've helped a lot of people do it. But the older your business is, the more credible it is. So of course, when your entity is older, you typically do get access to better funding, right? Which leads me to my next topic. A huge product that people use a lot are age corporations or age businesses. These are legal business entities that were established previously, and they have been able to accumulate age. They are presumed to be more credible, and they have access to more business credit products and financing due to the corporation's age and longer history, right? So age corporations are a way to fast track business funding. They're amazing. I use them all the time. I've had many clients use them. It is very important though, that you do need to make sure that you work with age corporations from somebody who actually knows how to source them and actually create them and use them, because a challenge that I've seen with other people using age corporations is they need to get quality age corporations from a reputable source. So that way the process is as smooth as possible. Now, one of my favorite ways to establish business funding and acquire businesses is actually through acquisitions. You're able to fast track acquiring business funding because you're able to acquire other businesses that already are operating, they already have markets, they already have clientele, they already have some kind of revenue, right? And so you do get, because of acquisitions, you do get immediate access to revenue, trained staff, and again, valuable customer relationships that you can actually generate revenue. Now, it is important for this as well too, that whenever you're doing for acquisitions, it's absolutely possible. A great way to establish business funding, especially high limits of business funding. But you do need to make sure that you work through the proper channels, because you do need to have good careful evaluations of business financial health, and making sure that integrations work properly whenever acquiring new businesses. Now, whenever I talk about business funding, right, there are many programs. There's business credit cards, there's business term loans, there's business lines of credit, there's equipment financing, there's commercial financing, there's residential financing. There's so many different funding programs out there. I could literally talk about the different funding programs for hours. Now, even though there are many funding programs out there, again, this is very general information. So generally, for most business owners, the best product that is going to be available for them, then the products that we focus on are 0% business credit cards and business lines of credit. Those are very important. There are many other funding programs out there available, but typically for most business owners, these are the best products for them to utilize whenever they're growing, right? Now, whenever using these products, these are some of the results that you're able to get whenever you implement these strategies. Now, the thing that I always have to note is that past performances do not guarantee future results. Every situation is different, and it's going to be based on your specific data points. But these are just some of the most common misconceptions that we see whenever we're going through funding. And we're just going to go through 3 of our most popular case studies, right? And so the first thing is that, remember, we talk a lot about business credit, we talk a lot about capital and credit-based financing. Now, one of the misconceptions one of the things that's important to note whenever it comes to funding is the 3 C's. You either want to have credit, you either want to have cash, or you want to have collateral, right? And so one of the misconceptions when it comes to building business credit is that people believe, hey, I may not have the greatest credit, so I can't access business credit or business funding. This was a situation with one of our clients, is that in funding, remember, there's a lot of different funding programs you available. This client had challenging credit issues, but they had a business that created cash flow and had good documented revenue. So because of that, even though they had personal credit issues, they were able to use one of our fintech companies that we work with a lot for revenue-based financing. And they were able to get $100,000 from a program called Divvy, or currently Bill.com, that they can use to implement their business, which is huge, because this was one of those companies that I talked about earlier. They already had a successful business, but they were used to investing all of their money right back into their business, which is great. They obviously have built a very successful business, but now this business owner has access to capital that they don't necessarily have to use their money anymore, or their own money more, to grow their operations. And an extra $100,000 is huge for a business when they're used to, investing and putting everything back into the business. Now, that's the first, that's one of the major, one of the first major case studies I like to talk about. The other one is that a lot of times, remember, we talk about multiple business products. When you go to banks, not only can you go to multiple banks and get different products, some banks, you can actually go to them and get multiple products at one bank, right? Key Bank is one of those major banks that we do this in order to do so. So we were able to go to one bank and get two products. This client got a $50,000 business line of credit and a $40,000 business credit card from one bank, and they got $90,000 in two products from one bank. So that kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier. Again, start out with 5 to 10 banks in your sequence, but sometimes depending on the results, you may have to have less banks or more banks in your sequence. That's a prime example of that. And then another one of our clients here, Chase is one of the biggest lenders. It's actually the biggest bank in the United States currently. And we had a client, they pretty much never used major banks. They just had a limit. They honestly just had a limited belief that the major banks were too big for them, and they just didn't think that they could really get access to capital. And really, despite that, right, and never using major banks, we were able to take them through Chase and get a $75,000 approval from one lender, which is the biggest bank in America currently, as of the time of this recording, from one bank, right, which is huge. Now, honestly, this happens a lot, right? There's hundreds of others that we could sit here and talk about forever, but truthfully, really, it's all about setting the foundation, and we get these results by setting the foundation that we talked about through this whole process. Because when you have a strategy in place, and you know not necessarily the scores, but what the profile and business needs to look like, it actually becomes pretty easy and predictable in order to get these results and put your business in the best position possible. Now, we've talked about a lot, but there's really only two things that matter. Setting the foundation. Everything we talked about today is really setting the foundation in order to make your business credible and get the funding, right? So it's setting the foundation to maximize those opportunities before you go through the funding process. You set the foundation first, and then you go through the funding process, and that's how you get the results after the foundation and the data points there are set very clear, right? And then ultimately, the only other thing that matters is getting high limit approvals, right? You set the foundation, you do all this work, you do all this structure, you organize all this information, all of this data, you create these relationships, you establish these products to get high limit approvals, right? Now, you do this by, very simply, you follow a simplified process in order to achieve the consistent high limit funding results that we've showed you. It's also leveraging a strong network of bankers, right? You want to understand how to leverage the application rules, and again, those networks of bankers in order to leverage and get those results. And then it's really understanding what relevant bureaus banks pull, right? Now, we talked about a lot. Now, what is it? We talked about the ideal data points earlier. These are the minimum data points. So these are what you need to get funded, minimum credit-based qualifications. We'll touch base on this in just a second. But typically a lot of what we do is credit-based financing. Whenever it comes to, if you're looking at scores, I know this is kind of a little contradictory from what I was talking about earlier, saying scores don't really matter. Scores just kind of give you a general idea of what could possibly going on. And generally, again, that's going to be about a 680 plus personal credit score across the board. So that's TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. When you're looking at those, you really want to have two major credit cards, minimally one, but you really want to have two major credit cards when it comes to business funding. And those accounts coming from a Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, right? Something of that nature. You really want to have one credit card that's at least 1 year old with a $2,000 limit, right? Especially when you're looking for high limits of capital, just like we talked about earlier, comparable credit. You want to have good comparable credit limits whenever you're going through the funding process. The other thing is no derogatory remarks, right? No collections, no charge-offs, no bankruptcies, things of that nature whenever you're going through the funding process. No late payments within the last 24 months. So within the last 2 years, that is really my biggest recommendation. Sometimes you'll hear online, no late payments within the last year. It's possible to do that, but it's still recent. So even though you could get some approvals, you're not going to get high limit approvals, right? And so that's why I personally say, from my experience, no late payments within the last 24 months, and we can get you high limits of capital, right? No more than 3 new inquiries within the last 6 to 12 months. You don't want to have a whole bunch of inquiries. You want to get those as minimal as possible. You also want to have really a 2-year plus average age history whenever it comes to getting business funding. Again, my opinion may vary from what you hear out there, but I just want to make sure that it's very clear that AUs, authorized users, if you're familiar with those, they do not help with business funding. They can be like a minor help, but a lot of people kind of base their approvals based on AUs. And when it comes to business funding, banks really want to see what you have been able to personally manage. What accounts do you have in your name that are actually qualified in order to, again, create those comparable lines of credit? Really, no new accounts within the last 6 to 12 months. If you have like 1 or 2, there are some things that you can look at, but typically, again, if you have a lot of new accounts, it's just going to lower those funding approvals. And then, just like we talked about earlier, that 1 to like less than 30% utilization. Now, what do you need to apply, right? Basic details about you and your business. You obviously have to have details about you, identifying information about you and your business. There are, contrary to popular belief, there are document-based funding programs and there are no document-based funding programs, right? So there are multiple options to choose from, depending on your particular scenario, depending on your particular banking product. And we kind of talked about this earlier. One thing to really note with funding is that there are 3 C's that we really look at when it comes time to get access to capital. 1 is credit, 2 is cash, and 3 is collateral, right? So those are very, very important. So now that we've come all the way to this, right? We've set the foundation. I've showed you how to get access to your credit reports. I've showed you different ways you can access the business funding. So ultimately, just like I talked about earlier, this is for people who are willing to take action. I give you very applicable information because I want you to go out and create leverage, right? So ultimately, what are the next steps, right? You take action on the steps that we talked about all today. You do it yourself and you go and get the funding that you need. And I would love to hear about all the stories, all the approvals, all the results that you've gotten, right? Now, I would love for you to do that. But at the same time, we also know that this can be overwhelming. So we do offer services in order to assist you in this process, right? So we offer a whole team to handle the entire funding process for you. We have a system and trusted bankers that really manage everything from A to Z, right? And we have a complete playbook and guide for every step of the way to manage your complete funding process. And it's actually a lot easier than most people think, right? So we really do this in 4 steps. For one, we have a personal and business intake. So you would go through an intake process. We would review your credit reports, all of the business structure. We do this completely complimentary. And then we identify any potential issues or discrepancies to prepare for your sequence, right? So a lot of the things that I talked about you doing, get your credit report, review those credit reports, spot those, differences, the discrepancies, identify each individual account, what's going on. We do that as part of for you. So that's what that process looks like. Then the sequence structuring. So whenever I talked about earlier, you set the foundation first. Once you get the foundation, you choose the banks that you'll choose, whether based on your the structure and the profile of your credit reporting agencies or the relationships that you already have. So you create that very specific list of the banks and you create the timing. Then we actually execute that with our relationship managers. So we already have the network of bankers. You don't have to go out and find your own. We have relationship managers with hundreds of banks nationwide that they will actually submit and manage the applications on your behalf, which is huge, just like I talked about earlier, with that trust factor when it comes to banking. And then ultimately a capital management plan. So one of the biggest things that we offer is when we're talking about high limits of capital, 50,000, 100,000, 200,000, some people may not have had access to that kind of capital before. And so the biggest thing that we do is we can't show you how to invest the funds, but we give you a lot of different strategies and coaching on how to build business credit, maintain business credit, and different strategies that you can create leverage in order to do the future funding rounds, like we talked about earlier, which does include being added to some of our communities for, again, continued education, industry updates, and we do meet weekly for Q&A as well too. Now for us, a lot of people ask all the time, how much does it work? How much does it work with you? How do I get started, right? And so the biggest thing for us, we're strictly a performance-based company. And so for us, we actually don't charge anything out of pocket to get started. We do the complimentary audits. We do all of that for you. We do all of the complimentary funding coaching and consults. There's a lot of coaching and timing that goes involved with it. You get a full-time support staff to assist with all your questions, scheduling, and all of that nature. You get introduction to all of our banking network. And the biggest thing for us is we're a performance-based company. So if we don't actually perform in getting you access to capital, we actually don't ever get paid, right? So very, very important. Our goal is really to fund you $100,000 plus, and this is really how we make it happen in the fastest time possible. This is really just a quick overview. We do that strategic funding evaluation. So that's the intake process of you submitting all of your information so that we can go over that. We verify that information based on the profile and things of that nature. We create a pre-approval qualification, and we discuss the first steps to get you funded. Now, everybody's first steps is different. The reason I say this is because ideally, as a funding company, if you're in a position to move forward and get funding, we would absolutely love to assist you in that process. Those may be your first steps. However, someone may come to us and they may have some credit challenges, or they may have some structure issues. And so their first steps, they may not be ready for funding immediately, but we still help them figure out their first steps to get funded. We have different solutions based on the challenges or issues that they may be facing. Then once they correct those, we can get them ready for funding, right? So I say that to say our goal as a company is to figure out the first steps to get you funded, and everybody's first steps is really different, right? Then we create that custom sequence and that timeline based on your individual strategies, needs, and goals. And then we actually run the play leveraging all of our resources in order to get it done. After a review, you do get a personal one-on-one strategy with either me or my team, where we actually discuss all of, again, your first steps. And we initiate and capitalize in bold your first steps, because everybody's first steps is going to be different for what they actually need to get done. Now for us, Christina and 7 Ways, they should have a link. We do it complimentary, where you can submit your information, you can get the link, and we can actually start the review process with you. And like I said, ultimately figure out the first steps to get you funded, regardless of where you are currently, right? Now, when you reach out to our support, I want to make sure that you guys do get support and you guys get the information that you need. Please note that responses typically take between 3 and 24 to 48 hours. And you must monitor your the team will communicate with you primarily through text. But anytime that you have emails, please make sure to check your spam or your promotion folder as well too. And then I'll actually make sure that you get a copy of this presentation for yourself. On that, we do give you some, this is one of those pages that you'll see at the end. If you actually click on the funding development consultation, the link will actually be included in there for you to book to go through that intake process. And then we also give you a free credit ebook, just so that you understand how to actually structure your personal credit report and get those notated. Now, it's important to note, when you get those words are clickable links. So once you click those, it'll actually take you to the respective pages. Now, of course, I tried to make it as thorough and I tried to cover a lot in a really short amount of time, or really as fast as possible. But of course, I do leave some time at the end for Q&A to clear up any questions or concerns that you may have. And so I do have about 15 minutes that I can actually sit here and take any, whatever questions you have, concerns that you have, and really give you guys some time for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Brian. I appreciate you so, so, so much. So yes, we are going to open up the floor for Q&A. So please please raise your hand or put a question in the chat.
Perfect. All right. It looks like Antonio has his hand up. Antonio, I would love to answer your question. If you could unmute yourself. My apologies.
Hey, how's it going again, Devin? I mean,
Hey,
Mr.
what's going on?
What if you have a situation where they don't want to remove charge-offs?
Um,
You know that's hurting you.
So the first thing, so whenever I talk about credit repair, it's always for the Fair Credit. It's always for the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And so the thing is, I don't know what a charge-off is. It's just a very broad question. If you actually submit your information, we can actually view that, those potential violations specifically. But a lot of times what you'll find is that even though the information is reporting, and the most compliant way for me to say that is that it may not be compliantly reporting. And so when you're able to spot those violations, you actually would dispute based on specific violations of the FCRA, which is the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So it's absolutely possible to get charge-offs removed. I've seen plenty of clients do it. It just, again, it's going to depend on that account specific details, which I'm not able to see the credit report, so I just wouldn't be able to answer that specifically as of right now. But it is absolutely possible to get those removed.
Okay, I agree.
Of course. It looks like that was, well, hold on. Let me see the chat. Let me check the chat. Oh, okay. It looks like Alan raised their hand.
Yes, thank you very much for all the time. And quick question. You mentioned this is all about business. I guess I have to start my business first before I contact you.
Ideally, so yes. So, well, a couple things, nuance of that. So ideally to start the funding process, yes, you would need a business. Now, if you want to get in contact with us first, just so that is one of the things that we offer, we can help you get your business set up. Just to make sure that you do follow all and set those foundational steps from the beginning. So it's not necessarily a requirement to have a business set up before you come and contact us, but it would be a requirement in order for us to actually get you funded.
Okay, then yeah, because I'm working on get my electrician license.
Okay.
And already I passed the exam, already approved by state. Just I need to just do all the paperwork, get the approval by them before I go forward, I guess.
Okay.
Then I can come to you.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So just whenever, so that's perfectly fine, dealing with state licenses and things like that. I would just recommend, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I would just say that, like I said, whenever you do get that done, come and talk with us first. That way we can make sure that your business is set up properly on the front end so that you don't have any issues later whenever it actually comes time to get funded.
Fair enough. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. You're very welcome. And let me see. And it looks like Cole has his hand raised next.
Hi, it's actually Nicole, but thank you. I just have a quick question. I'm wondering if this this funding process would work for a PMA or an unincorporated structure.
No. So
Okay.
So because it's possible to get well, remember, there's a lot of funding programs that I talked about. This is primarily 0% business credit cards and business lines of credit. It is possible to get private entities and non-statutory entities set up, but there's a lot more paperwork and review involved because the Secretary of State kind of verifies a lot of that information on the front end. So it's possible, it just wouldn't be for this particular strategy, but there are funding strategies that we can utilize if your business has the documentation and financial resources in order to support it. Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay,
But
thank you so much.
Of course, you're very welcome.
Okay.
All right. It looks like Roxanne Williams has a question. If you could unmute. Let me see if I can help you. Ask to unmute. I can see you in here, Roxanne. I can see your hand raised, but you're muted as of currently. What I'll do for time, I'll just, if you can get that unmuted, we'll come right back, or you can actually put your question in the chat. I'll check that in just a second. But for timing purposes, I'm going to move on to the next one. Tanya L, if you could unmute and ask your question, that would be amazing.
Yes, hi.
Hey.
I have my business and I've had my business for about 10 years, but I haven't really done anything with the business. But it does have excellent credit and I have excellent credit. And they always offer me loans and stuff like that, but I need to set it up in the trust.
Okay.
So I'm still working on that. Can you guys help me with that so I can transfer it over to that?
So transferring is probably more Christina's expertise. We can, we coach more from the funding. So we can create, if you get in contact with us, we can create some different funding strategies with where your company is now, and we could discuss some options now. And then we could also discuss some different funding strategies if you were to actually transfer that to the trust as well. But like I said, I can do it a little bit, but just Christina's, that's more her expertise. But yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you for that.
Of course, you're very welcome. And it looks like perfect. James J, if you could, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, sir. I just had a question. Do you have any advice for anyone who's coming off of a bankruptcy as far as trying to reestablish credit in order to get into a position to get business funding again?
Of course, of course. So the first question I have is that bankruptcy already removed, or is it still reporting on your credit report?
It's still reporting. It was just discharged like a few months ago, probably like in November, I want to say. So it's fresh. So, and then the thing about it too is I went through the whole thing and did the business funding with another company. It was, at the time was able to get funding and purchase real estate. So I had a lot of relationships with other banks, like such as Navy Federal and who else? A few different banks. So and part of those were part of the bankruptcy, unfortunately. So what advice would you have for me considering all that?
So the first thing I would say is we're going to need, so to go through funding, that would need to come off prior. That would need to be disputed so that it's not reporting on the account. The first thing is I would say get in contact with us, because for bankruptcy specifically, we have a lot of resources. We don't deal with bankruptcies personally, but we have a lot of resources if someone does have a bankruptcy. We actually have a whole separate team that we actually outsource to for like attorneys, like legal teams to deal with those bankruptcies. And they're very effective with helping clients get those bankruptcies situated. And oftentimes getting those removed in really a timely manner. So we don't do it personally, but I would say get in contact with us. Let's see what your situation is as far as your bankruptcy, to see if we could put you in contact with some of the people we work with, and they could absolutely assist you. And then while you're going through that process, to get the bankruptcy removed, yes, we do have some resources for credit builder accounts that you can start adding. But really, like I said, the bankruptcy, to really get funded again, you're going to need to get that bankruptcy removed from the credit report.
Okay, gotcha. Man, your information is in the is on the Miss Christina's portal, or because I came into the chat a little bit late because I'm at work. So okay. Yeah, where can I get your information from?
Absolutely. So yes, Christina should have it in the portal, and then what I'll do is I'll have her drop it in the chat or the link as well too, so that way you have it there as well.
Okay, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Sounds good.
Of course, you're very welcome.
The link is in the chat in order to get in contact with Brian and his team.
And then let me try to catch up on the chat. So the first thing I see Steven's question is, what is the most effective way to contact us? The link for Christina is definitely the best way to get in contact with us. You'll get into our system. You'll be able to communicate with our team, and we'll work on getting you all scheduled and processed. Scrolling up, Carlo, do we sue credit bureaus? So we personally do not. We don't teach that per se, but we do teach you how to prepare if you need to go that route from the way that we dispute for violations of the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So the most important part is really just making sure that all of your documentation is in order to really spot those violations if you're going through a credit repair process. My apologies. Which is an effective solution if it does come to that. Scrolling up, I'm looking at Roxanne Williams. It says cost. So depending on where you at, if you're ready for funding, you're going to be able to go through the process immediately. If you have credit repair issues, then that would be a little bit different. But just for funding purposes, the way that we work is we are strictly a performance-based company. So what that means is that we don't charge any upfront fees to manage any of this process and then take you through actually to get funding. Now, the way we work as a performance-based company, we just earn a 10% performance-based commission of the total amount funded after you actually get access to the funds. So that's how we work as a company. And then I'm trying to scroll up to see if I catch any other questions. I don't see any other questions. I will make sure, well, I saw a message at the top about the recording. You should have the recording for this. I can see some links down here for the YouTube recording. And then I will also make sure that, like I said, you guys get a copy of the actual presentation docs for you as well too. I've got like 2 more minutes. I don't see any other hands. I'm watching the chat just to make sure nobody else had any questions before I go. I don't see anything as of yet. As always, I do want to say I tremendously appreciate you guys. I am a part of the community. I would love to talk to you guys, figure out, again, the first step in order to get you funded. And I just want to always emphasize that, again, regardless of where you assume you are now, whether you think you're ready for funding now, whether you don't think you're ready for funding now, whether you might have, credit challenges, again, our biggest thing is really helping you figure out the first steps to get you funded, because we can give you applicable information and solutions so that you can help get in a better position for funding. So again, I just want to let you guys know, I appreciate you guys. Christina, thank you as always for letting me come back and give back to the group. And I look forward to seeing you guys very, very soon.
Thank you so much, Brian. I appreciate every time that you come and host this masterclass for us and educate the community on how they can tap into these credit cards and lines of credit for their businesses. So I put Brian's contact information, the link inside of the chat. Please go ahead and grab that link and contact. Go ahead and fill it out. It's a questionnaire so that you can get in contact with his team so that you can at least begin the first steps towards getting business funding. Like he said, even if you feel like you're not prepared, okay? So thank you so much to everyone who decided to jump on the masterclass at the last minute. I appreciate you guys so, so much. Our next masterclass is going to be on Thursday. It's going to be at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we have our CPA who's going to come and educate you guys on the 1041 form with the IRS, which is the form that you need in order to file taxes for the trust, okay? So don't miss our next masterclass, all right? With that being said, everyone have a blessed and amazing Tuesday, and I will see you guys on Thursday. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.